I never imagined my quiet suburban life would lead me to smuggling electric eels. Yet there I was that fateful Thursday evening, wrestling a hyperactive fish tank from the back seat of my Volvo while cursing under my breath. They don't tell you in retirement brochures that safeguarding your backyard from an overzealous homeowners association might require live, pulsing wildlife. But I suppose we all find out life's odd truths eventually. It started quite innocently. When I moved to Maplewood Heights a decade ago, I was simply looking for tranquility. The neighborhood promised manicured lawns, neat hedgerows, and an atmosphere of hush that city life had never offered. The HOA, in principle, was meant to protect these values. Rules about mailbox heights, trash placement, and permissible exterior paint colors. I agreed to the standard contract, nodded at the polite disclaimers, and thought nothing of it. After all, as a single retiree, my biggest concern was having a comfortable pool for my morning swims and a tidy front yard to avoid scandalizing the neighbors. But the real trouble arrived in the form of Karen Billings, Maplewood Heights' self-appointed social coordinator, or, more precisely, the meddling queen of compliance. She was a platinum-haired woman with laser-focused eyes that zeroed in on everything from your untrimmed shrubs to the faintest squeak of your screen door hinge. She wore pastel twin sets like a uniform and toted around a binder full of neighborhood guidelines, rummaging through them at the slightest hint of impropriety. I used to get polite emails from her about my recycling bin. Please ensure it's 3 inches from the curb, not 4. Then came the gentle reminders about noise levels. One time, I'd been airing out an old radio from my attic, testing its dusty speaker at an entirely reasonable volume, only to receive an immediate ping. HOA recommends moderate decibel usage. Those emails were never addressed to me personally. They came from the official Maplewood Heights email, but everyone knew exactly who typed them up with her hot pink manicured nails. Things escalated when she was elected as head of the Community Activities Committee. By then, she was unstoppable. Suddenly, block parties, chili cook-offs, and potluck gatherings were mandatory monthly events. The sweet, elderly neighbors on my cul-de-sac seemed to enjoy the occasional social swirl, but Karen took them to extremes. She installed fancy new signage at the clubhouse, handed out bulletins with color-coded schedules, and recruited neighbors to sign up for committees they never knew existed. In her eyes, Maplewood Heights wasn't just a community. It was a canvas for her to orchestrate events, all in the name of neighborhood togetherness. At first, I politely declined participating. I was never a big fan of large get-togethers. I liked small visits with a handful of friends, chatting about the trivialities of daily life. My pool was my sanctuary, a place for a calm dip in the morning and, on the hottest summer nights, a few languid backstrokes beneath the moon. I invited close friends over for the occasional barbecue. Nothing big, nothing rowdy. But Karen's demands escalated, always in that passive-aggressive tone. We missed you at the Maplewood meet and greet. Hopefully we'll see you at the next event, or we might have to revisit your membership compliance. That was her style, a half-veiled threat delivered with a tight-lipped smile. I assumed that ignoring her might make her go away. And for a while, I managed to float under her radar, quietly mowing my lawn with the exact brand of fertilizer the HOA required, wearing earphones to keep from making too much noise. Yet no matter how hard I tried, Karen sniffed out any perceived infraction like a bloodhound. She loomed around on her daily walks, always stopping to glare through my tall hedges, as though I might be harboring contraband garden gnomes. Eventually, the daily emails and door hanger notices stopped surprising me. Dear resident, remember to trim your ivy, or, kindly note, your front porch light is not in compliance, on and on. That was just life in Maplewood under Karen's rule. But then came the day she marched right up to my door with a thick binder in hand, pressed her finger into the buzzer, and stared through the peephole until I finally had to open. She was wearing a sun visor embroidered with Maplewood Fun Squad on it, and had a wide smile that never quite reached her eyes. Hello, neighbor, she started. I have a wonderful idea for our upcoming summer kickoff. We're having a pool party for the entire community. Over 70 people have already RSVP'd. Wouldn't that be something? And guess what? We'd like to use your pool for it. She didn't phrase it like a request. It was more of a pronouncement, the kind a queen would make to her loyal subjects. My confusion was immediate. While I was accustomed to receiving demands from Karen about compliance, hosting a community pool party in my own private pool, without so much as a neighborly please, sounded ludicrous. I had a flash of 70-odd people trampling through my house, dripping water everywhere, rummaging through my fridge. And, of course, who would be responsible for cleaning up? Certainly not Karen. I try to muster politeness. "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable hosting that many people," I said. "My homeowner's insurance." She waved a dismissive hand, as though brushing away a fruit fly. "We've got that covered. The HOA has event waivers. Let's not be negative. This is a chance for you to finally contribute to the spirit of Maplewood." "That's not the point," I argued, hearing the volume of my own voice rise in frustration. "It's my home, my property, my pool. I'm not interested in—" "Oh, come now, dear," she interrupted with a too-sweet smile. "All the neighbors will be so thrilled. Don't you want to be a team player? You live in Maplewood Heights, after all. Sharing is caring." My refusal didn't dissuade her. The next day, I saw flyers tacked up around the neighborhood. "Join us at the Maplewood Summer Pool Bash, courtesy of our gracious neighbor me." Had I lost my mind? I reread the flyer 3 times, anger boiling in my chest. It was official. Karen was forging ahead, permission or not, effectively commandeering my private space. This wasn't an oversight. It was an outright declaration of war. As word spread about the upcoming Maplewood Summer Pool Bash, my phone and inbox exploded with messages. Some neighbors were excitedly thanking me for hosting, under the mistaken assumption that I'd volunteer my property out of sheer generosity. Others were gently expressing their disbelief that I'd cave to Karen's demands. A handful asked if they could bring their own refreshments or if they needed to sign a waiver. It was chaos. Karen, meanwhile, strutted through the streets with the smug satisfaction of a general who'd just conquered new territory. It infuriated me to see her wielding my pool as a bargaining chip in her quest to unify the neighborhood. Everyone was singing her praises for organizing such a special event, while I was stuck with the headache and potential liability of hosting a massive party against my will. I tried to seek help from the HOA board, filing an official complaint with the new community manager, a timid gentleman named Francis. He nodded sympathetically in his cramped office while fiddling nervously with a giant stack of paperwork. "I understand your frustration," he said, smoothing down his thinning hair, "but Ms. Billings has a lot of influence. The board is quite enthusiastic about her events. They say it brings the community together." He sighed, tapping his pen on a desk calendar full of color-coded notations. "I don't think we have the authority to cancel it without risking an uproar. Maybe you two can compromise." "Compromise on what? It's my property," I said, the exasperation clear in my voice. "She just commandeered it like a medieval warlord. Is there no rule, no bylaw that prevents this?" He shrugged helplessly, producing a battered binder. "Our guidelines mainly address landscaping, external appearance, and noise complaints. We don't have a standard procedure for this situation. Technically, the HOA can request usage of private facilities if it's for the good of the community, but it's never been forced, as far as I know." That tiny clause, "if it's for the good of the community," was being twisted to justify a party in my backyard. I left Francis's office with a migraine. There had to be a way to make Karen back off, but she was unstoppable. I saw her over the next few days, measuring the side gate to see if it would accommodate massive inflatables, bright pool toys, and maybe even a margarita machine. My frustration ballooned until it nearly consumed me. Friends outside the neighborhood suggested I hire a lawyer, but that seemed excessive and expensive. Others said I should call the police on the day of the party, but that would just create drama and potential legal entanglements. Then there was the nuclear option, draining the pool. But that was equally expensive, not to mention it would leave me with a giant waterless pit in my backyard that could lead to lawsuits if someone fell in. Plus, the thought of punishing myself by losing my cherished pool for the entire summer didn't sit right. An outlandish idea percolated in the back of my mind. What if I could make the pool so undesirable that no one would dare set foot in it? I joked with a friend that I should fill it with sharks. But it was Maplewood Heights, not SeaWorld. And obtaining a shark was certainly illegal, or at least complicated. Then someone else joked, maybe half seriously, about getting electric eels. I laughed at first, but the notion lodged in my mind. Electric eels, while not typically found in suburban swimming pools, are undeniably a deterrent. Plus, rumor alone might be enough to scare people away. Perhaps I wouldn't even need the real thing. Just the threat that I'd introduce something shocking into the waters might do the trick. I was almost embarrassed at how the idea grew on me. Late at night, I found myself researching exotic fish sellers, reading about the biology of electric eels, how they generate currents up to 600 volts. Most were found in Amazonian waters, but occasional small-time aquarists sold them in the black market of exotic pets. Owning an electric eel wasn't something I ever thought I'd consider. But extraordinary circumstances called for extraordinary measures, didn't they? In the days that followed, Karen's preparations ramped up. She had a guest list pinned to the community corkboard, a sign-up sheet for potluck dishes, and even a volunteer schedule for pool safety monitors. I spotted her in my driveway, measuring the slope of the asphalt. Perhaps she was planning to park the ice cream truck or some other monstrosity. It was time for me to act, or risk my backyard being turned into a carnival ground. I spent hours on the phone with an old friend from my college days, Sam, who now worked at Marine Life Center in Florida. He was half petrified and half amused when I asked about acquiring electric eels. You do realize these are not goldfish, right? He kept saying. They can be dangerous, and they need very specific conditions. We brainstormed ways to ensure the eels wouldn't be harmed, and, equally important, that they wouldn't hurt anyone. Because as much as I wanted to sabotage Karen's plans, I wasn't interested in genuine bodily harm for my neighbors. I just wanted them out of my pool. Sam finally pointed me to a local exotic fish supplier in the city an hour away. I wasn't entirely sure if it was legal or if they had the proper permits, but they specialized in unique aquatic experiences, as they put it. I inquired about renting a couple of eels for the weekend, something to film for a documentary, I said vaguely. A hush fell over the phone line, followed by soft laughter. They said they could arrange it for a price, with strict conditions about water temperature, oxygenation, and salt content. Are you sure you know what you're getting into? The salesman asked. I swallowed hard and said I did. As the days ticked down to the party, I felt a sense of mischief. It was probably the biggest scandal I'd been involved in since sneaking out of my parents' house as a teenager. Except this time, it was to protect my property rights, preserve my sanity, and strike a blow against Karen's tyranny. I convinced myself that no one would actually be hurt, just startled enough to stay away. The eels would be placed in a protective net barrier within the deep end of the pool, ensuring they didn't slip into the shallows where kids might wander. It was a cunning plan, if unorthodox. My phone continued to buzz with messages from neighbors. Some teased me about the rumored special surprise I was planning for the bash. Karen had apparently told them I had a big reveal in store. Little did she know that, yes, I did have a surprise. One that would hopefully keep every last person out of my private swimming pool. The night before the so-called Maplewood Summer Pool Bash, I embarked on what could only be described as a clandestine mission. I drove my battered Volvo to a nondescript strip mall at the edge of the city. The contact I'd spoken with, a man named Dominic, ran his exotic fish operation in a cramped storefront wedge between a pawn shop and a shuttered bakery. The display window was unremarkable, blacked out with old posters advertising aquarium filters. Inside, the store smelled like a swampy lagoon mixed with decades-old fish food. Tanks lined every wall, bubbling with different shapes and colors of aquatic life. Lionfish, piranhas, stingrays. Dominic, a wiry older man with thick glasses, greeted me with a cautious smile. "You must be the one who called about, the eels," he said, sizing me up. I had the distinct feeling he was trying to figure out if I was an undercover cop. I nodded. "I appreciate you holding them. This is a unique situation." "You're telling me," he muttered. "I've had some strange requests in my day, but renting electric eels for a suburban pool, that's new. I won't ask what you need them for, but here's the deal. They need specialized conditions. I've set you up with a temporary holding tank. It's got the right salinity and oxygen levels. The eels themselves are about 2 feet long each, relatively young, but they can still pack a mean jolt. He walked me through the care instructions, rattling off details about temperature gauges, feeding schedules, and how to handle the eels if they became stressed. My palms were clammy. I had a fleeting urge to call the whole thing off. But then I recalled Karen's smug grin, her unstoppable campaign to turn my personal oasis into a carnival. My resolve solidified. After signing a wad of paperwork, some of it likely disclaimers about illegal usage, I handed over a hefty cash deposit. Dominic gave me a side-eye glance that suggested he expected to never see his precious eels again. "You be careful," he warned as he helped me load the tank into the back of my Volvo. "Treat them right, or you might not live to regret it." The drive back to Maplewood Heights was nerve-wracking. Every pothole threatened to jostle the water, and I drove at a snail's pace to avoid sudden movements. But eventually, I arrived home, carefully unloading the temporary holding tank into my garage. I covered the windows and locked the door, as though I were hiding a top-secret government experiment. My heart pounded with both anxiety and an unexpected thrill of rebellion. At sunrise on the day of the party, I was up transferring the eels into my pool's deep end. Sam's instructions, combined with Dominic's advice, led me to create a custom net partition that would keep them contained, ensuring they couldn't drift into the shallow end. I prayed it would hold. If not, the entire plan could blow up in my face, literally. As soon as the eels slipped into the water, I felt a weird sense of awe. They were sleek, dark-bodied creatures, gliding smoothly through the water. Every so often, one would flick its tail aggressively, and I'd feel the faintest static through the net. It was enough to confirm their potency. I half expected them to glow or crackle like cartoon lightning, but they were surprisingly quiet, formidable in their subtlety. By mid-morning, the first signs of party preparations appeared. Karen was at my front gate, hammering a banner that read, "Welcome to the Maplewood Heights Summer Bash," in obnoxious neon letters. A swarm of neighbors began hauling and folding chairs, coolers, and trays of food. Music blared from a portable speaker. I hovered on my back porch, keeping one eye on my new Aquata bodyguards and the other on the unsuspecting guests. Before long, the chatter rose to a steady roar as people milled around my backyard, gawking at the shimmering water. I overheard kids begging their parents to let them jump in. My nerves spiked. This better work, I thought with a pang of guilt. I prayed no one would be foolish enough to ignore the signs I'd posted near the edge. Caution, unstable water conditions, and no swimming. They were typed in a big, bold font, accompanied by a hazard symbol I'd found online. Karen, of course, promptly tore one of them down. "We're not scaring people away with nonsense," she said. "It's a pool party, for goodness sake. Lighten up." To my dismay, a group of teenagers approached, towels slung over their shoulders, ready to dive in. I was about to step forward and intervene when something stopped them in their tracks. A faint crackle in the air, like static. One boy jerked his hand away from the water's surface, wincing. "What was that?" his friend asked, startled. They both hesitated. Then the boy touched the water again, gently this time, and quickly pulled away with a yelp. "It shocked me," he exclaimed. A few curious onlookers gathered. Karen, apparently noticing the commotion, marched over in a huff, determined to dispel any illusions. "Don't be ridiculous," she said sharply, stooping to swish her hand through the water. For a moment, she seemed fine, no immediate reaction. My heart pounded as I wondered if maybe the eels were lurking deeper, not near the surface. Then, in a split second, she gasped and yanked her hand out as though it had touched a live wire. Her face went white. "It's electrified," she squeaked, staring at her trembling fingertips. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some neighbors backed away, nervously eyeing the ripples in the pool. Karen blinked, momentarily speechless. The children around her looked terrified. "This can't be right," she insisted, regaining her composure. "There must be a malfunction with the pool equipment. Everyone step back, step back. We'll figure this out. No need for alarm." Her voice shook with barely concealed panic. This was it, the outcome I'd hoped for. A moment where the entire neighborhood realized my pool was out of order. I didn't even need to mention the eels by name. The faint jolts at the surface were enough to deter anyone from jumping in. As a hush settled over the crowd, Karen's face reddened, overshadowed by fury and embarrassment. She marched straight up to me, wagging a finger in my face. "What have you done?" she demanded, her pastel sun visor quivering with rage. "Me?" I asked, feigning innocence. "I put up warning signs, told you the pool wasn't safe for guests. You tore them down. I'm not sure what you expected. You sabotaged this event," she screeched, her voice trembling. "You couldn't be a good neighbor, could you? You had to." She fell silent, probably realizing she was on the verge of accusing me of something that might land her in deeper trouble. Because how could she explain that she'd forced her way into my property in the first place? The partygoers were now in a state of confusion. Half of them were heading for the snack tables, uncertain if the party was canceled. Others were cautiously sipping lemonade, watching Karen's meltdown with mild fascination. A few, grateful for an excuse to leave, began packing up their folding chairs. I braced myself, wondering if Karen would call the police or some city inspector. But she didn't. Instead, she threw her arms up in frustration. "Fine," she said. "Everyone, we'll relocate to the community clubhouse. There's a pool there that's actually functional. Let's go." She stormed off, leading a reluctant caravan of neighbors out of my yard like a flock of startled geese. Her pastel-clad entourage followed, grumbling about the inconvenience and carrying their trays of half-eaten potato salad. Within minutes, my backyard was deserted. Silence fell over the property. I stood there, heart hammering, watching the electric eels ripple through the deep end. Relief washed over me. For better or worse, I'd succeeded. The dreaded Maplewood Heights summer pool bash was effectively driven away. Of course, I knew this might just be the beginning of a new wave of battles with Karen. But at least, for today, I had safeguarded my sanctuary. In the aftermath of the electrifying fiasco, my property returned to the blessed solitude I cherished. The would-be party guests, once thrilled by Karen's promise of free food and a private pool, now avoided my backyard as if it were radioactive. Rumors flew around the neighborhood. Some claimed my pump filter had malfunctioned and was shooting out mild electric currents. Others whispered that I was some kind of eccentric scientist performing experiments on my pool water. But the real story never came out in the open. Nobody dared suggest I'd intentionally released electric eels just to thwart an unwanted party. Karen, of course, was livid. Her humiliation was nearly complete when dozens of neighbors streamed into the community clubhouse, complaining about the fiasco and the wasted trip. By all accounts, the relocated party was a disorganized mess. The clubhouse pool wasn't big enough to accommodate so many swimmers, and half the snacks ended up left behind in my yard. But in typical Karen fashion, she tried to salvage it, praising everyone for their flexibility and community spirit, placing the blame squarely on my equipment failure. The HOA board, nudged by Karen, sent me a stern letter demanding I immediately address the electrical hazard in my backyard. Francis, the beleaguered community manager, came by for an inspection, accompanied by a professional pool technician. I cooperated fully, stepping aside while they examined the wiring and the pump system. Naturally, they found everything in perfect working order, aside from a small net partition submerged in the deep end. When the pool tech asked about it, I shrugged and mumbled something about experimental filtration. I watched them test the water with specialized instruments, each reading coming back normal. Francis furrowed his brow. "No sign of electrical conductivity," he commented, glancing at the technician. "Are you sure your guests felt a shock?" "Multiple witnesses said they did," the technician replied. "But it's not from the pool equipment. Could have been static discharge from the deck or a short from a device someone had around the pool area." He sounded unconvinced. They packed up their gear and left, with Francis mumbling something about how the HOA would have to rethink its safety regulations. It didn't take a detective to guess how Karen felt about the inconclusive results. She wanted a scapegoat, a reason to pin me to the wall. Yet, ironically, she couldn't press the issue without admitting she forced a party onto my property without permission. So for the time being, I was in the clear. Still, tension simmered in the air. Whenever I drove down Maplewood Lane, I'd see Karen standing at the edge of her yard, arms folded, brow furrowed, leveling a glare my way. No more sugary hello, neighbor. No friendly wave. Just silent suspicion. Meanwhile, the eels continued living in my pool net for another day, until Dominic came to collect them. He arrived in an unmarked van, peering around warily at the manicured lawns and pastel houses. "This neighborhood is too neat," he remarked, shaking his head. "Gives me the willies." I helped him fish the eels out of the water, carefully, with thick rubber gloves. They were calmer now, having acclimated to their environment, but they still shuddered and sparked if handled too roughly. "You actually did it," Dominic said, a note of wonder in his voice. "I never dreamed you'd follow through with something like this. People pay me for exotic showpieces at parties, but sabotage? That's a first." I let out a nervous laugh. Desperate times call for desperate measures. He loaded them into a secure tank. Just like that, the eels were gone, off to some other curious aquarium or specialist who'd rent them next. Despite the headache and anxiety, I felt a surge of gratitude for those slippery creatures. Without them, Karen would have turned my backyard into a circus, leaving me to bear the brunt of the mess and liabilities. Days turned into weeks, and the story of the electrified pool gradually became lore in Maplewood Heights. Most neighbors never knew the truth. They only knew that my pool was somehow off-limits. I noticed fewer stares from across the fences. People seemed to lose interest in me altogether, which was perfectly fine. I didn't relish being the center of gossip. Karen, for her part, retreated to other endeavors. She poured her energy into orchestrating a humongous 4th of July block party on the main street, complete with an amateur fireworks display and an ill-fated attempt at a dunk tank. I wasn't invited to help, of course, but I heard the horror stories about how the dunk tank's seat malfunctioned, leaving a hapless volunteer suspended above the water for hours. Sometimes, it seemed the cosmos had a sense of humor about these things. Despite the cold shoulders I received from Karen's inner circle, many neighbors quietly expressed approval of my stand. A few longtime residents discreetly confided that Karen had been overstepping her role for ages, but nobody dared confront her for fear of petty retaliation, like the dreaded compliance letters or public humiliation at an HOA meeting. "Good for you," whispered old Mrs. Hampton, who lived 3 houses down. "You gave her something to think about." In the months that followed, I reclaimed my peaceful routine. Morning swims returned to normal, untainted by the fiasco. The rumor mill eventually found new targets. Someone's fence was 2 inches over the property line. Another neighbor had put in a pink garden flamingo that violated the serious aesthetic guidelines. Karen channeled her energy there, pouncing on unsuspecting folks who didn't have the nerve to push back. Every so often, I still recall the rush of that day. The chaotic blend of fear and triumph. Hearing Karen squeal as she pulled her hand from the water. It probably wasn't the proudest moment of my life. Weaponizing exotic marine life against a petty neighbor is hardly a morally neat scenario. But I'd be lying if I said I regretted it entirely. Maplewood Heights has a way of turning even the tamest souls into renegades. In a twist that might surprise some, Karen eventually knocked on my door again. This time, months later, in the calm of autumn. She looked tired, her cheeks pale. She started with a subdued greeting. No pastel visor, no binder. She got right to the point. She wanted to bury the hatchet. "We may never see eye to eye," she admitted, "but we live in the same neighborhood. Maybe we can find some middle ground." The cynic in me wondered if she was planning another scheme. But something about her demeanor seemed genuine. Maybe she realized that her iron fist approach was costing her support. Or maybe she just needed a favor. Still, I held my resolve, politely stating that I'd comply with any fair HOA rules, but that I wouldn't be strong-armed again. She nodded, then, surprisingly, apologized for the fiasco. "That pool party got out of hand," she said softly. "I didn't handle it properly." We left it at that. A simple acknowledgement that lines were crossed. From then on, Karen stayed in her lane, mostly. We managed polite nods in passing. She even stopped highlighting every minor code infraction around my property. It was as if some uneasy truce had formed, each of us aware of what the other was capable of. And while we'd never be friends, We learned to coexist without open hostility. To this day, people still talk about the summer the HOA tried to hijack my pool. I've heard a dozen different versions of the story. Some say I used an invisible electric fence. Others say I installed advanced military-grade defense systems. One eccentric rumor insists I trained piranhas to guard my backyard. Nobody believes the truth when they hear it, chalking it up to tall tales and suburban legends. But I'll never forget the gleam of those two electric eels in the morning sunlight, the hush that fell over the party, and the unmistakable jolt that sent Karen running for the hills. When I do my slow backstrokes now, in the tranquil waters of my pool, I can't help but smile at the memory. In a place where you're told what color your mailbox should be, sometimes you have to break the mold to protect what's yours. And if that means deploying a couple of wriggling, electrified defenders, well, so be it. After all, community spirit only goes so far before a person has to stand up and say, enough is enough. End of story.